Let's start with the crazy scenes last night in Miami at the Copa America final between Argentina and Colombia at Hard Rock Stadium, where event security was totally overwhelmed. Fans filled the stadium, what appeared to be well beyond capacity, stealing the spotlight from a final which was eventually won 1-0 by Argentina without Lionel Messi on the field for the end of the game. Lautaro Martinez coming off the bench and onto the score sheet. He gets the game winner in the 112th minute of extra time as Argentina claimed their record 16th Copa America title of all time. Of course, there's been quite a bit of fallout from what happened before the match. This is the latest statement from CONMEBOL. As it is already known, during the final held in Miami, fans without tickets went to the stadium's vicinity, which delayed the normal access of people who did have tickets, slowing down the entry and leading to the closure of doors. In this situation, CONMEBOL was subject to the decisions made by the Hard Rock Stadium authorities, according to the contractual responsibilities established for security operations. In addition to the preparations determined in this contract, CONMEBOL recommended to these authorities the procedures proven in events of this magnitude, which were not taken into account, not capitalized for emphasis. Herc, is it too harsh? Is it an exaggeration to say that this tournament was a failure?
No, not at all. The world is watching. It's supposed to be your dry run for a World Cup. This is a Copa America. It's a big deal in itself, but for the United States, a country that is hosting a World Cup, this is your dry run. Except it was CONMEBOL running point. And why was it running point? Because CONMEBOL back in 2016 realized they left so much money on the table, they couldn't go back and leave that money on the table again. Not if they could afford it. We're going to do this ourselves. So the powers that be here in CONCACAF and U.S. Soccer said, okay, we'll allow you to host this, and you can do it your own way. Those measures weren't followed. I think it's evident that corners were cut. The bare minimum was done when it came to the field, the integrity of the players and their safety on the field. Nowhere near the safety measures or enough of them or the protocols that should have happened in the Uruguay-Brazil game, in the semifinal. And in the final, knowing what just happened and knowing that you've seen big events around the world, Euros, Wimbledon, the Champions League final, things like this have happened, you didn't think this scenario could be plausible. And what we saw is deplorable. And I'll start with, I know everybody wants to, there's going to be plenty of blame to go around, but I got to start with the fans. I got to start with these people, these delinquents. This is deplorable. There are people going to this game without a ticket with the idea of getting in without a ticket, with the idea of it doesn't matter who I am hurting or who I am stealing from that pay thousands of dollars, I will get here and I will do this. And then the safety measures, we can hear from, Dade County Police in Miami. We can hear from the stadium, Hard Rock Stadium and their authorities and their facilities or whoever was in charge about the measures that were placed. But what we saw was people in that stadium, per reports, 7,000, if not more, in that stadium without a ticket, that forced people with tickets not able to go in, bypassing safety measures. God knows what they had on them or what could have happened without those safety measures in place. And here we are for the world to see, while there's a Euros going on that looked amazing, that just a splendor off the field, and whatever you want to say on the field, but off the field it looked like a grand celebration. And here we are, a laughing stock in this country and beyond, about to host the 2026 World Cup, and we've got CONMEBOL pointing the fingers at the stadium officials. You've got U.S. Soccer quiet. You've got FIFA not a peep. It's a laughing stock. It's deplorable and it's embarrassing.
Shaka, there's a lot to pick from, too. What happened in the final wasn't just happening in a vacuum. We had what happened in the semifinal between the Uruguay players and the Colombian fans. We have all the field concerns. We had Shakira extending halftime. We had the ticket prices. I mean, you smile about it, but if you think about, like, Kansas City, for example, the Uruguay-United States game, we saw that game. That was a huge make-or-break game for the United States in their home country, Shaka. And it wasn't sold out. It wasn't even close. And if you look at the TV ratings, Kansas City was the #1 market. I mean, people were priced out of that game. There's so much to pick from. It's hard to think of any way, other than the dream final they got, Colombia and Argentina in Miami, which they couldn't handle, that this tournament was a success.
Yeah, let me say, I'm smiling because had you asked me whether this tournament was a success or not 5 minutes ago, I'd have said, I think it was a success. I think, given what this tournament promises to be, involving the North American, well, certainly the CONCACAF Confederation, in parallel with CONMEBOL in terms of putting on events and what all the potential that it holds. I am buoyed by that. But then listening to both you and Herc speak and seeing the images that we just showed and recognizing all the issues. And while over the last, 24 hours, it has been about the final, well, over the last 72 hours, it was about Colombia, Uruguay added to the problems that we saw last night. Throughout the entirety of this tournament, we've been speaking about field conditions and how poor those were. And I am sitting here kind of rethinking my own opinions about this tournament, my own opinions of 5 or 6 minutes ago, because there really was a lot that went wrong that shouldn't. And what is even more depressing, what is even more hard to accept, is how everybody is trying to pass the buck on responsibility. If somebody stepped up and just said, we got this wrong, here's why we got it wrong, here's what we thought or we assumed, or whatever it may be, and we'll be better next time, we'll be better in 2 years' time, whatever it is, I would have said, you know what, we are seeing a blueprint for what's to come. And we can believe in that blueprint. But the quiet after the semi-final, Uruguay-Colombia, was deafening. Now, the noise you've heard since the final has been even more concerning. CONMEBOL passing the buck to Hard Rock. Miami-Dade coming out and saying, well, listen, we didn't really have much to do with this at all. CONCACAF, USSF, FIFA, even more quiet. And that, for me, is where the real concern is. How, as I maintain, a potentially exciting tournament for the region has become, as to use Herc's phrase, a laughingstock for certainly those in Europe who are looking on and wondering how we could manage the game this side of the pond.
I know it's not going to be CONMEBOL, it's going to be FIFA. But if we do look ahead 2 years, of all the things that you've seen here, what's your biggest worry, something that you fear might repeat itself when the World Cup comes around?
It's a loaded question, and I think my biggest fear is there are officials, entities in this country that don't realize, and this is an excuse because those people are deplorable, they're delinquents, they're thinking about themselves and have no moral compass, but they don't understand how the game moves certain people around the world. And I don't want to confuse that as an excuse or in any way.
It's a reality.
It's a reality that these games are treated differently in different countries because of the outcomes. And they don't expect people to do those things here. They can, and if you don't take the proper measures, will happen. Now, in saying that, I don't have 1 ounce of doubt that U.S. Soccer, FIFA can run a proper World Cup on U.S. soil, and it'd be like it was on the women's side in '99 and like it was on the men's side in '94, a complete and utter success. Till this day, on both sides, the most important World Cups financially, in growth, in attendance numbers, whatever you want, they knocked it out of the park. I have no doubt they can do that again, but certainly, if you couldn't host a tournament with 2 confederations, 2 small confederations, by the way, okay, on home soil for the rest of the world to see, what will they think about an expanded World Cup on your home soil? 16 teams in the Copa America, 48 in 2 years' time. 3 times the teams, 3 times the people coming in. It's a little concern. To your question, Sebi,
I mean, having seen this, we said it after the semifinal, right? We said, well, having seen this, surely they'll be ready for the final in Miami. Having seen this, Shaka, I gotta think, and again, it's not CONMEBOL, and I do think that's a big differentiator here. You just have to think that they're going to be ready if not zero excuses come 2026.
Yeah, listen, I think FIFA are a different animal in terms of organization and in terms of the zone, and I'll call it a zone around stadiums.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, FIFA have fairly ridiculous stipulations when it comes to the area around stadiums. What signs can be on buildings, and if somebody who is not a FIFA sponsor just happens to own a building within eyesight of the stadium.
We saw it in Qatar. You couldn't get anywhere near the stadium.
You couldn't get anywhere near. But for instance, Qatar was a fairly different in that there were new stadiums, not very high buildings. But for instance, I was in South Africa. If, for argument's sake, Heineken had a building within eyesight of one of the stadiums, Heineken not being a FIFA sponsor, Heineken would have to cover up that sign, just because. I mean, it really was managed to that point. And for you to host a World Cup, you have to agree, and everybody around has to agree. So I feel that zone around the stadiums, FIFA would manage a whole lot better. There's already talk about moving the stands back in the different stadiums to allow for the larger fields because the smaller fields were a concern. As we sit right here, just kind of recognizing how FIFA go about their business, as I say, the zone around stadiums, and believing what I'm told about expanding the size of the fields, I still feel field conditions are a concern. And while we recognize all those problems that laying turf on top of AstroTurf may cause, I sat in on a presentation for an AstroTurf company, this is many years ago, and if I had never played the game, what these people were telling me about AstroTurf and its comparisons to grass, I would have absolutely fallen for, and I would invest all my money in this AstroTurf company because this is how they sell it. Now, I could sit here and I could just imagine some executive somewhere making a presentation and saying, well, this is why it didn't work in Copa America, but if we put another layer of, and I'm making this up, if we put another layer of rubber and then put the grass on top, then it's true. And then the ball will roll through, or the ball will bounce through, and all these executives who've never played the game themselves absolutely falling for it. And that for me is one of the things that, as we said, just kind of believing what what the executives are saying about and what experience has shown us about the organization. I just have a huge concern about the pitches. Just
briefly, we're going to get another taste of this in 2025 with the Club World Cup, which FIFA will have a hand in operating here, which I would assume will be very different than what CONMEBOL did, but you're going to have lots of lots of different types of fans out there supporting their teams, and we'll see if the fields are still an issue, and we'll see if security is an issue.
All right, we're seconds away from hearing from Alexis Nunes, who was there, but first let's hear from the managers from last night, Lionel Scaloni and Néstor Lorenzo.
Lo de antes del partido, difícil de explicar, difícil de entender, jugadores una hora de pie fuera del estadio esperando que vengan sus familiares, y tuvimos que salir a jugar el partido así que con eso te digo todo, la sensación de no saber dónde está tu familia, nos llegaban mensajes, algunos no respondían, veíamos los videos que circulaban y no estábamos ajenos a lo que estaban pasando, y bueno, en esas condiciones salimos a jugar el partido, y creo que los chicos de Colombia también estaban en una situación parecida, muy raro.
Creo que hicimos un muy buen primer tiempo, creo que hicimos un muy buen planteo, un muy buen partido, y después se empezaron a dar situaciones también anómalas, ¿no? Bueno, calentaron, se enfriaron, calentaron otra vez, el tema del inicio. 25 minutos en el entretiempo, cosas raras para los dos, para los dos. No es que es una queja ni nada, pero yo dije que podía repercutir eso en el físico, y generalmente la tensión la siente más el que menos experiencia tiene en este tipo de eventos, ¿no? De finales, y nos pasó factura, creo.
As promised, Alexis Nunes joins us now for more. Alexis, tell us where you were pre-game and what you saw.
Well, Sebi, thankfully, we got there in true ESPN fashion probably 6 hours before the original kickoff time of 8 p.m. So we were safely inside. But like I was saying earlier, about an hour and a half before that original 8 p.m. kickoff time, I was just looking around at the stadium and seeing that it wasn't even really what felt like a quarter full. You know, journalists had sat down, everybody was in place. The team started coming out. We saw their grand entrances, but the fans were just not there. And I remember getting up to go and just look for some water to see what's going on, and saw absolute chaos unfolding outside. I know a couple of the Colombian journalists showed me videos from outside, and they said, "Did you know this is going on right now?" And it was just giving me flashbacks of Wembley and that Euro final that I was also at as well, and seeing videos like this one of people trying to get into the air ventilation system, jumping the fences, jumping the barriers, climbing over the walls. It was just absolute chaos. And honestly, from being at that semi-final between Uruguay and Colombia, I have to say I wasn't surprised. I almost expected it. And I remember going into this, I said, I hope that the police do know what they are getting into, because before the final, they did tell us, Miami-Dade police, that they were employing hundreds of extra police officers, both undercover and uniformed for this, that they were going to be cramping down on things like tailgating in an effort to stop, I suppose, the alcohol consumption in the hours leading up to this. They were not going to allow people to have watch parties in the parking lot. But even from, I told you, 6 hours before the match started, we were driving into the parking lots and people had already set up their tailgates. People had a number of vendors as well were setting up in the parking lots just outside the stadium too. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that were out there already from many, many hours before. And you now can assume that many of them were unticketed ones. And I remember speaking to a Miami-Dade police officer, and he said never in his 28 years has he seen anything like this. And he works normally at the Hard Rock Stadium for NFL games, etc. They've hosted a Super Bowl, and he says, never have I seen anything like this. And I said, well, how are you going to prepare for 2026? Because that's a World Cup. And he said, I honestly don't want to think of it. And that was my biggest concern, if they know what they're getting into, because drawing the comparison to Wembley, I know the police presence was there early at Wembley, and they were already making arrests 5 hours before the games. And the police in London and in the UK and in Spain, Italy, etc., and maybe other South American countries too, we know the type of pandemonium that football games like this does attract. And you know what they say, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. And this was the devil that no security force here was ready for whatsoever. And the chaos continued inside as well. I mean, the fans that broke in without any tickets, they filled up the aisleways, the pathways. They were sat down, maybe 2-3 people per step. Where we were in the press tribune, we were scrunched in. Everyone kind of moved together because people were afraid. They said, if a goal happens or if a fight happens, where will we be? I actually saw fellow journalists breaking up fights that happened, because then people who had no tickets and were sat in seats of people that had tickets, when they eventually got through, they were like, you need to come out to my seat. You know, there was one of the fans saying he paid $2,000 for his ticket and he was going right back to the box office to demand a refund. Good luck to him. We don't know if that happened, but they almost started an altercation. I remember 2 of the Colombian journalists in front of me reached over and just grabbed him away and said, we can't do with this now. We cannot do with this now. But it was chaos inside. Uniformed police did come in probably, I want to say, 10 minutes into when the actual game started. They started removing people from the steps, but those people left, and best believe they came back. They weren't exactly escorted outside of the stadium. They were just removed from those walkways and aisleways. And then they came back, and then they kept coming back, and a new set of people kept coming back, and they stayed until the final whistle. So it was absolute chaos, Sebi, outside from hours before, and it was chaos even inside straight until the final whistle.
Alexis, I'm sure you saw the reports of the head of the Colombian FA who allegedly was arrested for getting in a fight with security. That's just one of the many stories that's kind of coming out from what happened before this game. I'm curious, though, because you mentioned that you were at Wembley and the comparison to Euros. Obviously, there's some similarities here. What are the differences between what you witnessed 3 years ago and what you witnessed last night?
The main difference is that I genuinely can say this now looking back on it, and I felt a lot safer at Wembley. I really did. I felt that at least the police force, even though they were overwhelmed at the start, and the stewards knew how to handle that situation. And in what we saw last night, I never once really had faith that they could handle this situation and that it was progressively going to just get worse. And that's kind of what happened. Like I said, there were still people, which I'm sure was a fire hazard as well, just everywhere, in every nook and cranny, just taking up every bit of space in that stadium. And I know it's amazing scenes that sometimes we celebrate from the world of football, whether we see it, you know, even for me in Jamaica or in Mexico or in South America, where people just want to see a game so badly. They sit on the barriers, they sit on the walls. But now you don't want to see that in the USA when you know it's 2 years before a World Cup, when you're welcoming the world to your home. And I know, of course, that is a different conversation because FIFA then will be in charge. But I think if you compare it to Wembley, I was definitely a lot more uncomfortable last night because, like I said, after speaking to the police officers after, they flat out told me they really did not expect this, that in all the meetings and briefings that they had before this, they were told about what happened in North Carolina between Uruguay and Colombia and to expect a certain type of pandemonium as well. They said that they presented a number of different measures to be taken place, but of course, those measures do come at a certain budget. And they said that those measures and their police force was cut by 40% because they felt it would still be enough. And unfortunately, as we saw, it was not. And I think we all knew that it would never be enough. We knew the type of pandemonium that a final like this was going to attract. And I think if you compare it to Wembley, this is much more of a nightmare than that one was.
Alexis, great stuff, not just on this story, but throughout the tournament. Take a break, take a vacation. You've definitely earned it. I know you've been out there in those parking lots sweating. It's not an easy job, but you've been on this show, you've been on SportsCenter, you've been on ESPN Deportes, you've been crushing it, and we certainly appreciate your time here on Futbol Americas.